record on this computer. Great. All right.
And then
we are
I don't know
recording.
if anyone has any questions for Sarah before she jumps off, feel free.
Hey, this is Kara. And for everyone who doesn't know me, Kara Kraboski, I'm with the Washington RC&D and on the steering committee for the Washington Prescribed Fire Council. I did want to ask, just because I'm learning more about sort of tribal law and sort of how the lands work, is that, I know for like lands that are in trust on the reservation, those are under BIA. Are these lands that are like not within reservation? And so they're, that's why they're
right.
covered by state law?
Yep, exactly. So Karuk and a number of other tribes in California, because of our history and the unratified treaties, have many lands in their ancestral territories that are not held in trust by BIA. And so this would have addressed the permitting regime on those lands and sort of recognize that at least there's shared jurisdiction over these cultural practices. The other thing, just to really quickly mention on the BIA lands that I think is going to be helpful, is that there's a really strong recommendation to remove BIA from that process coming out of the Wildfire Commission. Not in all instances, but if a tribe wants to, that a tribe would be able to run its own cultural burning and prescribed fire program without BIA oversight, which I think is just going to be, that has to then go to Congress and get passed. But if that does, that will be an incredible opportunity, just given how difficult BIA has been to work with in many jurisdictions.
Thanks.
Great. Anyone else for anything for Sarah before she has to jump off? Okay. Cool. Well, I'm pretty much at the end, but I did want to share the lessons learned because I know that was what Danielle had originally asked for. And I thought we had to go through all of that to get to the lessons learned. So I guess the one of the things is that, the community building, I think, is so important in the work that we do. And when I think back on the Prescribed Fire Council, and we started in 2009, I just really think our biggest achievement as a council was the community building aspect and really building the social and political capital that allowed us to do all of this other work over the last 10 years. And so I think that there's nothing wrong with this, like that community building being one of the primary goals. I think of all the people that we do policy work with and all the connections that are in place. And like, even how I found Sarah originally was through someone else who had attended a Trex event. Like they're all this web of connections, that allow us to do all this amazing work. So we should keep that in our sights as a primary goal of the work that we do. And then don't be afraid to borrow ideas from other places. I feel like so much of the success we've had in California has been us taking and adapting ideas from other places, like the PBAs or, Trex, obviously. I mean, and the Prescribed Fire Council, and just being able to kind of take it and not be arrogant about that your place is different and therefore other people's innovations don't apply. California, we're like the worst at that, right? Oh, this is California, it's different, no one understands. And that's not true. Like the things that work in other places can be adapted to work where you are too. And I think we all know that. But then also don't be afraid to do something no one else is doing. And we have had that happen here too, where there's so many points in like the work that we're doing and that we've done. Primarily, I think the big example for me was when we were working on the liability law change. And I had so many people, even close partners and collaborators in California, say, that's never going to happen. You shouldn't waste your time on it. And I just didn't believe that. And so we kept plugging away and we were able to make those changes. And like, who would have ever thought California would put $20 million aside for a prescribed fire, like for basically socializing the risk of prescribed fire. It's totally awesome. And no one would have ever thought that would happen. So don't be afraid to ask for things that seem outlandish. And then one of the things I was thinking about, maybe this is a cheesy personal reflection, but I think the authenticity matters. And I think this goes back to the community building, but I think like a lot of when you're going into like leverage your social capital or to work on these complex policy issues, or working with partners and trying new things. And I just always think like a lot of the work we've done in California has been so much about like the personal interactions. And I like to send out like personal emails asking people to sign on to bills. I don't want to send out some like newsletter format. I guess I'm not super professional. And I think that's actually key to my success is like, you can be yourself and it's good to be authentic. And I think it comes through in the work we do that we actually care about this stuff. These are, I know it's part of who we are and it's part of California and it matters, and that really comes through. So don't be afraid to be yourself and speak your mind and say all the things that really matter, because I think we need those people in this space. So yeah, I think that's it for me. I think I'm on time too. Look at that, Daniel.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Lania. That was a wonderful presentation, and thanks for really getting into some of the meat and potatoes behind that. And I think your authenticity always shows through. So I appreciate that too. Any questions from folks for Lania before we transition over here to updates from Washington?
This is Brad Washa from Utah. Do you have me?
Yeah, we got you, Brad.
Yeah.
I was curious on the liability measures that you have in place. The $2 million that's made available if damages are caused, is that paid up front before any liability insurance? And then I think you said you weren't, private entities weren't having any success with getting liability insurance, but if there were, have you seen cases where those rates have come down because of that?
What was the first part of your question? I think, were you asking if it's primary to private insurance? Is that what you said?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. The claims fund is primary. And we just rolled it out in June. So it's hard to say, we're not necessarily able to speak to like broader patterns yet. But yeah, we really don't have a lot of, there are almost no private insurance options in California. So we haven't, that interaction. I mean, there are some, like I know of one private burn boss who still has liability insurance, but it would be interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure if his insurance company is aware of the claims fund. Honestly, some of the folks who still have insurance are kind of on a like, don't ask, don't tell kind of basis with their insurers, where they don't even want to bring up the fact that they're doing this work, or it's kind of like, don't poke the beehive. So I doubt that someone like the person I'm talking about would want to call up his insurance company, because that would just draw attention to the fact that he's doing this work. Yeah, it's just really complicated in California, right? And everywhere, but yeah.
Lania, sorry, go ahead, Brad.
Well, I was just saying thanks for that. So.
Oh yeah.
Lania, I have one quick question, and then I think Parker has his hand up. You mentioned that you're having trouble getting qualified instructors for the state level certification. What are the qualifications that are a challenge there? And the question behind the question is whether or not there could be kind of an interstate exchange here from other state agencies or folks like that who might be able to bring some of these ideas back.
Yeah. So the problem is really around the California State Fire Training process, which is under CAL FIRE and the Office of the State Fire Marshal. So it's a very different process than, for instance, NWCG or something like that, right? So CAL FIRE is its own whole system, and in order to instruct the state certified burn boss class, you have to be a state certified instructor, which is a whole process that like no federal people have that because they don't work in that space. So it's like a California specific thing that's a huge pain in the butt, where you have to do like multiple weeks of instructor training. And then there's a whole task book process to show that you have instructor skills, and it could be years for someone to gain that certification. And then they also have to be a state certified burn boss in order to teach the class. So then there's another layer of complication, and being like an RxB2 or something wouldn't fulfill that qualification. They'd actually have to take the class. So we're in a place where we have like a few people who are state certified instructors and CARX, but those people have limited time, and then you have to have a cadre of instructors to teach the class. Like there's just a whole host of issues.
Got it.
So when the class happens in November, that'll be the first time it's happened in almost a year. I hosted it last December, and it's like we can't only do it once a year. That's just crazy.
No.
So
Sure. Thank you. Parker?
yeah, sorry, that was long-winded, but
No, it's great.
Well, thanks for this, Lenya. Hi, everyone. I'm Parker Titus. I work for the Nature Conservancy in Colorado as their fire program manager. Been here since 2016. Previously worked for Nature Conservancy in Florida in fire management. So two very different worlds, as you can imagine. Lenya, I feel like I've been stepped into a time machine, and I hope Colorado, the future of Colorado is where California is. And I think in many ways we're on some of perhaps what California's early trajectories were, mainly in thinking about where a prescribed fire council is, where the state is with fire, with the recognition that really it's the federal agencies leading prescribed fire in the state currently, and who are really showcasing and demonstrating that activity. I wonder, the barriers assessment work that was conducted early on, Colorado, we're currently looking into what the barrier situation is here, and perhaps some ways to tackle this. I'm wondering what your experience was in thinking through and developing those barriers. Sort of who was in the collaborative group? What were the discussions like? Was it a facilitated thing? How long did it take to really do that work? Any kind of feedback would be appreciated. Thanks.
yeah, and I see Sarah still on some, I might bring her in on this too. So I had done, back in 2008, I actually did a survey in Northern California that was like of all the federal and state agencies and timber companies and tribes who were burning, and did my own. That was like the initial assessment that I did when we were starting out our prescribed fire council, and that was my master's research. And that was like pretty, looking back, I'm like, oh, I was asking like all the most basic questions, but that was the first time anyone had done that for California. So I think it was helpful for us to understand what Sarah did when the Karuk tribe commissioned that Good Fire report. Was a much more in-depth set of conversations. And Sarah, are you still on? And would you want to talk a little bit about the Good Fire report and how you approached that?
Yeah, sure. So it was really conversation oriented, taking the survey work that had been done by Lenya, by Courtney Schultz out of Colorado, by some other folks that had done sort of more academic methodological attempts. What I did was really to pull those potential barriers, and then, as Lenya highlighted earlier, really focus on crafting solutions to them, like sort of came at it with the assumption that if people were still concerned about things, that these were still barriers, and then we needed to come up with policy solutions. And so I do think that there's still room for ongoing survey work. I'd love to know how barriers are shifting as we're actually implementing these changes, and what continues to need to be worked on. But for us, at the time that I came in, it really was through this in-depth conversation process where I would talk to people for 3 or 4 hours, and then they would identify other people to talk to. And until I got like repeated names, I just kept going down that wormhole. But was great for building community, sort of as Lenya said earlier.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. And thank you, Sarah. I know you probably have to drop off here soon. And safe travels. I want to transition this time period, and thank you again, Lenya. And if you think of more questions for anybody here, just pop them in the chat. We'll have some time at the end, but I want to transition now to give the floor to Kate Williams with Washington DNR, who will be presenting on some of their work. Thanks.
Thanks, Daniel. So for those of you that I don't know, I'm Kate Williams, working for Washington DNR. I'm currently a co-chair for the Washington Prescribed Fire Council. We have Kara Karbowski also here, who has been the council coordinator up until this past year. He's been involved in a lot of the ledge efforts that I'll talk about. And then I think we still have Sammy Chanel, who is my fellow co-chair on the council. She's currently on a suppression assignment, so she may be popping in and out by phone. I'm gonna try and share screen. Okay, is that popping up for your slide for everybody?
Yeah, we got you. That's great.
Perfect.
I'm seeing, Kate, I'm seeing the just the barriers, or maybe it's slow on my end. I'm just seeing the barriers report.
Godwin, are you seeing a slide with background outcomes lessons learned?
Negative. I
We're
see the
seeing
barriers report as well.
Yeah, I think we're seeing your browser.
Thank you.
It's a very nice looking browser. Your tabs are very well organized.
Yeah. It looked like the right place to start.
Let's try this. No.
We see the presenter mode.
Yep. Let's see how I switch that. It's been a bit since I've been in Zoom. Ooh.
We gotcha. Look at
Are we
that.
there?
Yes.
Okay, there we go. Here comes the charm. So I'm going to do a quick overview today, just real quick on some of the legislative outcomes we've had and that the council has been directly tied to. And then I'll spend hopefully most of my time chatting about our lessons learned, just because we've been talking about them a lot recently. For those of you who aren't as familiar with the Washington Prescribed Fire Council, just as a quick overview, council was originally formed in 2004 as a regional council. So it began focused up in our kind of central North Cascades area, originally founded by DFW, actually, who pushed this to get more prescribed fire in the state for wildlife habitat and fuels reduction. The council expanded to cover statewide in 2011, and we were fiscally sponsored under the Washington RC&D. Very recently, this past year, we just separated to operate as an independent nonprofit. So the council is now a standalone 501c3. And so we are going through a lot of internal growth as the council of what is our role in the state? How do our partners interact with the council? What work is the council taking on, especially in regards to policy and legislation? Some of our past outcomes, the council, with the help of Washington RC&D and the Nature Conservancy, originally brought trucks to the state. And Kara, do you remember what year that was? Was that 2016?
2017.
2017. So in 2017, we brought kind of the first Trexes to the state, and that really triggered a chain of events, specifically relating to some of the legislation that's resulted in Washington. So after Trex came in, the council helped co-develop House Bill 2928, which also was known as the Forest Resiliency Burning Pilot. That pilot triggered quite the landslide of both programs at the state level as well as funding opportunities. I'll chat a little bit more about kind of the outcomes and the findings in the next slide, but after Forest Resiliency Burning Pilot passed, we also co-developed the House Bill 2733, which resulted in our state certified burner program. You can look at Washington as a few years behind California in terms of California tends to be setting the pace at passing and bringing in legislation, and Washington is typically pretty quick to follow and implement behind. Very recently, the council also helped push for a smoke management plan update, and that has just been approved by EPA. So this past month, it was announced that EPA has formally approved, and we will be adopting a new smoke management plan, which is the first update since the 90s. So it's been quite a while for Washington operating under an outdated smoke management plan. With that forest resiliency burning pilot, it highlighted a number of barriers and just capacity gaps within Washington that many of our practitioners face. So just capacity wise, we haven't had many folks that have been burning in Washington overall, especially compared to other states. The feds were primarily leading state. DNR wasn't doing much at all. So DSW was really our only state agency for a while that was doing any sort of ecological or broadcast burning. A lot of that had to do with our policies and just internal state culture, resulting in internal policies that led to a series of barriers for state employees to not only burn on state managed lands, but also to permit and approve burns on non-state lands. So here in Washington, the state will permit for any sort of private land burning. Tribes here are considered sovereign, so we do not permit neither for the actual act of burning or the smoke on tribes. It's all voluntary for them, which has been helpful in terms of the tribes standing up prescribed burn programs, but it's been very difficult to get private entities independently burning in their own systems. We've also had a lot of communication issues over the years of some negative feelings, as probably everybody here on the call is well aware. Historically, recently we've actually run into the opposite, and we've done such a good job with our communications that we're getting a huge demand for prescribed fire, and our policies and permitting system can't really keep up at the moment. With that passing of the pilot project, it also led to just the timeline of the Prescribed Fire Council updating our strategic plan. So in our very recent strategic plan that just expired, we had a 19 to 22 plan that highlighted the following priority areas, with that policy, influence, and issues resolution being our number one. Tying back to some of those House bills and Senate bills that you saw, some of the big wins for the council was getting our certified burner program not only funded and stood up, we've hired a manager for it, and within a year of that program standing up, I believe we're already at 5 certified burners, with more on the way. So it pretty much was a program that stood up within 3 months and is running and gunning. And we're still having some stumbling blocks internally within the DNR of how that operates. We will be running into the same problem that California is currently facing in terms of qualified certifiers or recognized certifiers, but we don't have the same issue of DNR follows NWCG. We just have a severe lack of burn bosses within the state. So I think total in DNR, we have fewer than 10 NWCG qualified burn bosses. And so we are just running into a capacity gap internally of how do we burn on our own lands while also certifying private landowners and folks that are going through this program. But overall, the council has been very successful in pushing the state to at least allow folks to go through this program and have funding if they want to burn on their own land. Tara, is there anything that you want to mention related to kind of past council priority areas and successes?
I think there's a couple, and maybe you're going to get to this, so maybe I shouldn't say some of these things. The only, one thing that I would add, and there was some legislation that passed around, so we had identified, through the 29-28 Forest Resiliency Burning Pilot Project, that those list of barriers. So that report had some barriers that have really propelled this work forward, including identifying the certified burner program as a thing to move forward. But the council's first strategic plan also identified these things. So there's these threads that by having these strategies and these barriers sort of in documents and collaborative documents have helped propel these things forward. And one of those other pieces is there's some legislation about burning in the UGA. I don't know where that currently stands with where that's actually in statute, but there's some other pieces that we've been working on and identifying as challenges to moving work forward. So that one was the one I was thinking of, Kate, that has me forward. I have some lessons learned and stuff too, but we can get to that later.
Okay. Perfect. Touching on the barriers, even though we had some barriers identified within our burning forest resiliency pilot, we didn't really have a document that led to the so what. So we've had a lot of barriers to prescribed fire identified all across a number of state documents and strategic plans, but nothing was really compiled together. Some of those barriers didn't match up. We just had a lot of talk about prescribed fire without practitioners really sitting down and nailing down what is the problem, what's the goal and envisioned end state, and what do we need to do to get there. So this past winter, DNR hosted a collaborative workshop, but it was really run by our partners in terms of the content, the outcomes, the findings. And we developed this collaborative prescribed burn barriers assessment and a strategic action plan. And this couples very nicely to what Lenya shared of what is happening in California, but this is kind of combined. Rather than having the good fire report and then a state report, this is really the state just listened to our partners, or tried our best to listen to our partners and bring together a cohesive plan. As part of this, we have essentially by topic of barriers. So we have regulations, training, planning, operations, and then an education and outreach section. And each of those sections lays out what is the issue, what are we going to do to fix the issue, and specifically the near-term actions that we collectively need to take. I'll get into kind of a lessons learned with what the intent and what we'd hoped to have that plan look like versus what it ended up looking like. But I will say we had great conversations just by hosting this workshop. It was a week-long workshop. We had basically one day for each discussion topic with a rotating group of folks that came through. So some folks came in just for one specific topic that tended to be their specialty, either for them as an individual or for their organization. We had great discussion. As part of each daily discussion, we had folks flag at the end which of these actions or which of these barriers needs a policy-based solution. And so we had individuals that were sitting down and a lot of practitioners that sat down and realized, hey, what I'm saying, I don't think I can solve on my own, or this isn't something that my agency can solve on its own. I really need some sort of policy reaction, either at the state or the national level. And so at the end of the workshop, we had a half day where we sat down, laid out all of the policy topics that had been flagged, and worked actually with our state forester in the room to start prioritizing those policy items that were suggested. And so at the end of this report, you will see a prioritization of state policy actions where we flagged in the workshop what has a policy connection and generally what needs to happen. How is it connecting to all of these issues? So just want to tie this to it. I'll throw a link in the chat afterwards, but this is very recent. This was shared and published, came out just in May. So it's a new tool that we're hoping our partners will pick up and utilize, as well as the DNR itself, where we can all communally point to this report and say, this is the action that my organization is prioritizing and working on. And this is the timeline that I hope to have this action completed by, here are the partners that I need in order to tackle it. And with that, I'm going to jump into lessons learned, just because I know that this is what Daniel was hoping to kind of get at for some of our partners here, of just the past decade of the council working on policy and state legislation. I will flag that the first thing that we have learned, especially myself as a new officer, is capturing previous lessons learned in writing from the council. We've had some major transitions in leadership within the past year. A lot of things were not documented. We've had past officers suddenly leave where we didn't necessarily have direct access to their knowledge base and how things had operated before. We've been very lucky that Kara has stayed on as essentially a phone a friend when we need help. But there's just so much history of what the council has done and the connections that we've had that have been lost in that transition. We are also realizing how heavily we've relied on individuals, not even organizations, but just individuals to move things forward. And with the council, especially as it relates to policy and funding, that has been major, and we are feeling that gap right now. It's become very clear that as a council, in order for us to move forward, we need to restructure a little bit what we're doing, clearly communicate that, and then be able to pass that on to our next cohort, hopefully. We've also run into this issue that it's hard to communicate with our council members about what we're doing. clearly capturing and communicating that out would be very helpful in probably getting some support from our actual council members and our membership base. And it's not always been so smooth. There's been a lot of assumptions that the officers are sharing that out, and hasn't always been the case. Tara or Sammy, is there anything that you want to comment related to this one?
Yeah, I just think I agree with Kate. I mean, for a long time, the council was, you know, myself, Reese Lawley, when he was with the Nature Conservancy, were really carrying the torch. And I think, you know, the lessons that Lenya talks about building community, I think that's kind of a stage where we're at in Washington. We do have a community, but getting them to come back to the table and to engage more fully. There's just been some capacity issues and where people's attentions have been focused, and with there being a lot more interest, particularly from on the private land side, people are wanting to get involved now, in a way that they weren't necessarily before. And so, you know, I think that lesson from Lenya as far as that community piece and building that in the beginning, I think is really, really critical. But I mean, I know people are far along within their council. So I just think that's like a thing to be considering depending on where you're at, is to make sure you have more people at the table. So it's not just, you know, you and another person trying to carry some of this work forward. And to be clear, it wasn't just me and Reese, but there was many other people, but at times it certainly felt that way.
And this dovetails very nicely into the next lesson learned of just utilize strengths of the member individuals and organizations. So as Kara said, we had really two individuals for years that were putting in the time for our policy and legislation to just provide that. We had capacity from the Nature Conservancy of their policy specialists to go track legislation on behalf of the council, provide comment on behalf of the council. It was a major contribution from one of our partners that right now we don't necessarily have. And so it's been a big question as we look at potential policy that we'd like to put forward as the council of who is doing that work. Most of us, everybody at least officer level has another day job that's full-time, that takes a ton of time. Really relying on our membership base as well as just the specialists within our organizations to help us move specific tasks forward has been instrumental in having any say. In the past, we've also brought in a law firm to help us. So we realized that we were not gaining as much traction with our smoke management plan and not having clear communications with the state about where they were at. And so the council took it upon ourselves, to contract out a law firm just to follow that and essentially keep up with the state in terms of updates. We are a council of mostly practitioners. I don't know if this is true in other states, but a lot of the involvement is pretty much at burn boss level or lower. And so we don't necessarily have a lot of higher policy or higher organizational knowledge. A lot of it is folks that do the work themselves. And so we've had to learn to kind of pass messages up and have better communication within our own organizations in terms of just knowing how to push things forward, since most of us are boots on the ground. And on that note, we need decision makers present in the room to be able to make decisions. This was tying back to our barriers assessment that I shared, probably the biggest lesson learned for me. We had great conversation. We had amazingly smart people in a room representing their ground. And yet when it came time to say, what are you going to take on? What is your organization going to tackle? Folks did not feel empowered to say, yes, my organization is willing to take that. We had hoped with our barriers assessment to assign some sort of responsibility or at least be able to tag folks. That did not happen. There was a lot of folks saying, I think somebody else should do this, or I think that this organization is best suited to take that. There was very little, I think I am best suited to take this. And listening to the room, it was because folks didn't feel that they had that decision-making power, especially at the agency level. So we're running into this right now. One of our major barriers in Washington is, funny enough, agreements and just being able to burn with each other. I'm amazed that other states seem to do this so seamlessly, but for us, it just always becomes this cluster of, do we have an agreement in place? What sort of agreement? What qualifications are you bringing? And especially as soon as you bring any sort of agency into it, it just falls apart. TREC seems to be the magic tool that it's not looked at as closely, but we are finding even with this contracting that this discussion keeps stalling because we as practitioners do not know our agreement mechanisms well enough to even know what the solution looks like.
Right.
As soon as we propose something, it gets shot down. So this is our probably biggest policy issue, which isn't even policy. It's just when we get the contracting specialists in the room.
Sammy, I see you have your hand raised. So let me pause you briefly there, Kate.
Okay.
Yeah, hi all. Sorry for those of you who I don't know, I'm Sammy Chanel. I'm a fairly absent co-chair of the Washington Prescribed Fire Council with Kate. I apologize for that, Kate, and thank you and Kara for putting this together. Anyway, I wanted to jump in a little bit here just because you're talking about how even though we have a lot of the operational folks in the same room having those discussions and trying to figure out who can accept responsibility on, like, who's willing to accept responsibility on paper for a lot of these things. What we found was the default ended up making a giant to-do and responsibility list for the council. And I think part of that was maybe a lack of gosh, how do you say it? Like a lack of definition of what the council is responsible for and what they're not responsible for, and understanding, as Kate said, everybody on the council has a day job. The council is not their full-time job. And yeah, if you go back through a lot of those documents from the Barry's assessment, the things that a lot of folks just kind of, again, by default put on the council were, it was excessive and not realistic, but also I think it was just, some of it was just a result of not really having that clear definition or like rebranding, I guess, of the council.
Perfect segue, Sammy.
Oh.
Branding matters.
Sorry. Well done, Kate.
Great clue in. As Sammy just said, we have also discovered that branding and how we talk about certain things turns out really matters in terms of the council, the activities that the council takes on, and also the content of the concepts and policies that we want to put forward. We've had some very successful interactions with our policymakers here in Washington. We have a lot of support, especially from our Congress people. They have been very clued in. We can get them typically on the phone. However, we have had some issues where some of our concepts, and I'm not even sure how to phrase it, but some of the priorities for the council have been seen in the past to conflict or compete with some of our politicians' efforts. And so something that we didn't expect going into, we had a concept about community fire management. It ties in all of these tools, ideas that we all utilize, but really bringing it down to the community level. And we had some resistance here from the state of it competing against some state programs. And so the council actually just had some friction with some of our historical supporters of going against programs that politician was standing up. And it wasn't a big deal at that time, but I just want to highlight for folks that are going to be new to this, and especially pushing forward ideas that might be new, making sure that you're clearly communicating with your politicians, that you're hoping for their support, that this isn't going to go against their own personal agenda. And then finally, just aligning efforts where possible. Here in Washington, the last 2 years, it feels like every organization is going through its own strategic planning at the moment. We have a lot of folks that are just spinning wheels and have been spinning wheels about where to even start. We know what our priorities are, but it's just making sure that everybody is on the same page of what this first step forward is. So the barriers assessment was meant to be and intended to be really that document, to be that first step of, hey, we all sat in the room, we talked about this. What are you going to do? Let's have the council website essentially act as that central placeholder where we can list and track what each of our organizations is doing. Especially as a statewide council, we don't currently have regional chapters. We don't have great engagement at a local level. It really is a few times a year that we get together from that same statewide perspective, oftentimes with the same players. And it can just be very difficult sometimes to keep up with the minutia of project and activities that organizations are working on. So we're trying to get that focused and trying to have a centralized place where we can share that transparently. But for at least the last few years, that's been a little difficult just as folks are trying to redefine what they're doing following the massive amounts of funding at this point, and just cluing in on what all of our priorities are. With that, Sammy and Kara, is there anything else you want to add?
I have a few sort of specific, like policy legislative level lessons learned from my perspective. Particularly, we haven't had recent legislation really, so really the certified burner program and before. And I think, you know, as we've said, like having those written, as I've said in reference here, like having those written documents or strategic plans, these barriers reports are really instrumental when change happens. Like I think the big moment that we always talk about in Washington is our 2014 and 2015 wildfire seasons, and that catalyst for change was like huge. That's like the next legislative session in 2016. That's when the 2928 Forest Resiliency Pilot Project like went forward, because of the legislature was like, we need to do something. We thought that suppression was the answer, and now, hey, maybe we have another really record-breaking wildfire year, 1 million acres burned and all sorts of things. And that really was a catalyst for, we need to do something different. But that legislative session, that was the only really bill that came out, was that prescribed fire bill. So that was like a big moment that we were ready to take advantage of as sort of like a set of practitioners. The other thing, and I wouldn't necessarily expect Kate to talk about this, and that there's been nothing written in our strategic plans about this. But I think that when I first started with the council back in 2013, 2014, DNR, the Department of Natural Resources, was not coming to the table as a burner. You know, they were coming to the table. So DNR regulates prescribed fire, both smoke and sort of the fire danger aspect, right? So you have to get a smoke permit and then a permit from the regional office to burn. They are the wildfire suppression agency, and then they also manage state lands. So they're a land management agency as well, but they were only coming to the table as a regulator. And they're, again, not talked about necessarily like outright in our strategic plans, but it was pretty much known that we needed DNR to be coming to the table as like, they need to be doing work on their own lands, and we needed them to like be coming as burners, really to inform the, you know, part of that's informing the regulatory process. You know, you had DNR folks permitting burns, but they didn't know anything about prescribed fire. And I think that's still something that we're working through, but basically some of that work that we did was really bringing the legislature along. So that piece of having the Nature Conservancy and their lobbying work and the efforts that they had in relationships with the legislature and talking about prescribed fire was really critical, because they supported prescribed fire and were willing to move things forward and move forward legislation that really was also trying to move DNR forward. And so depending on where you're at, what your state looks like, I mean, that was certainly something that we like had to do, was just like, we needed them to be here at the table. And Kate has been awesome. The program is small. I mean, Kate's not with the prescribed fire program anymore, Tier. But we still have, you know, a set of folks that are working on this and trying to expand that within the organization. I think that's huge. We also had a leadership change within DNR that was really critical. The previous sort of commissioner of public lands, which is an elected official, was really anti-prescribed fire. And with the new commissioner, we had a much more supportive environment. And so that was really critical as well. So those are kind of, from my perspective, really key pieces of having someone who can like access the legislature and has the time and capacity to like actually put in that work to pass legislation, and build those relationships. And then from my end, I mean, having DNR come to the table was like really, really critical. And it's been awesome having them with us.
End of report.
Yeah, that's a great flag on both of those. You know, it seems like bringing state agencies along is a perennial problem. Some are very invested and some are really not. And some of that seems to be change happens at the scale of individuals sometimes, and that's a little bit of a wild card. So, you know, you can't necessarily count on a new commissioner coming in who is supportive of prescribed fire. You know, I think we've got some similar recalcitrance that we're dealing with here in Colorado. That makes it hard to get active engagement from a state agency around some of these issues. So it does not seem like there's a silver bullet solution around that. You know, it's building community, it's working different angles, it's trying to bring the legislators into the mix, because sometimes that can pull an agency in a different direction, right? They can thou shalt a lot more effectively than the rest of us, but it's still, you know, the metaphor of the silver bullet implies that what you are trying to address is a werewolf or another monster, which seems to be the case in this situation. Well, thank you, Kate. That was excellent. And Kara and Sammy, thank you for taking the time to put that together. I want to transition here and open up the floor for any additional questions to our presenters, and bearing that, give some space for some of the other states that are represented here to give an update on what they're doing, some of the challenges they may be facing, or successes that they've seen.
So this is Brett Wash again from Utah, and I forgot that we were supposed to introduce ourselves when we asked a question. So I retired a year and a half ago from the BLM in Utah and recently took a job as an assistant professor at Utah State University with their extension and the College of Natural Resources. But my question for the Washington State folks was, so how are you guys engaging the timber industry? Because they don't do a lot of BD type burning there at all.
That's a good question. So timber industry at this point, in terms of engagement with the council, has been relatively low. Most of our private timber in the state is over on the west side. They don't necessarily do a lot of burning that's impacted by any of the current regulations. The DNR has historically been set up to support industrial burning. And so they haven't necessarily needed to tie on as much. That being said, with the insurance industry where it's at, there's rumor for Washington that some of the insurance carriers for the private side have been telling our industrial burners that they need to start going through certified burner certification, or else their insurance may be dropped. And so that is a new rumor that is pushing them to become very quickly interested in prescribed fire, start reaching out to our certified burner program to figure out what is that, what do they need to even be prepared for that. So right now engagement is low, but it is on, especially from the state side, something that we're cluing into of just how to bring them along, how to essentially meld their objectives with a lot of the other objectives that are more ecological coming from our current member base.
And just to add on to that, a little bit of context is that our industrial burners are primarily doing pile burning, and in seasons where fire risk and things like that are less of a concern. And on the east side of the state, it's predominantly, federal and state lands, and there are some private in industrial silviculture operations, but they're much smaller, and so it just really hasn't been as big of an element, which is where predominantly most of our broadcast burning is happening on the east side of the Cascades. So that's kind of where that dichotomy is and why they haven't been as involved.
Well, appreciate that.
Hey, Heather.
Gwen, I think you had something first, and then Heather, I got you there next.
Sounds good. Who was first?
I saw Gwen had piped up there about the same time as Brad. I want to give them some space if they're still with us.
Yeah, I mean, I was just wondering if we were just gonna take numbers to go next or whatever.
Yeah, I think just raise your hands and we can work through with the time we've got here.
Okay. And then I raise my hand.
Yeah.
Howdy, folks, and I know I'm a new face in this crew here, and I can see the difference too. I am the chair for the New Mexico Prescribed Fire Council now. I recently retired from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I was the Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program State Coordinator. Prescribed Fire and my landowners, I'll bring the landowner group to the table. That's what we do here. Now, this Prescribed Council, what we have here, we've been running this since 2010. It's all voluntary, like your folks were saying. It wasn't their full-time jobs, but I got involved with it when I first came into the state in 2015, 2016. Been a member ever since because I believe in fire. And so when they heard I was retiring, they kind of recruited me real quick. And I haven't done too much of anything other than be a representative and a voice for this council. So I'm hearing a lot of different things in Washington and California, and some of the things that we have addressed and how we've got these people involved and stuff like that. We had a Prescribed Fire Act passed in 2021. And guess who was on the back side of it? In 2019, they had to get working groups together and the like. Well, the council was there. All right. We're also on the steering and selection committee of the people who are going to transfer over with their own. If they've got NWCG specs, they can come in too and help us train our certified burners. And our certified burners will be private landowners. So and that should be rolling out here in the fall. And that'll be for burn piles. We're also going to do a burn plan course. So we can get all those kind of things covered. So that's how we got in bed with those folks. And then another thing I heard was about who's in charge. Now, our state forester is on board, okay? And so that has made a lot of difference in our work here. We've been around for a little while, like I said, since 2010, and trying to make our way through this stuff and get fire on the land where it needs to be. Right time, right place is what we're talking about there. So our pile burn certification should be coming up here soon, really soon, like we're talking October, November. And then we're gonna do, let's see what else I got there. They gave me a list of stuff because I'm a new person. So for this level, not new to this, but new level. So let's see. And I guess we're updating permit and trying to get that stuff, trying to get those addressed, those issues. We've had the smoke people at the table. We've had everybody's been coming in. We're lucky that way. I heard folks talking about contracts and MOUs. If you've got some agency folks in there and at your table, they can do that. Now, I bring the whole package because I did all that for my work. So, I mean, I could do that piece of it and then, take care of all of those things. We've got ourselves registered in all the federal funding project, let's see, the funding systems. Get yourselves in the SAM, get your DUNS number, do all that crazy stuff and have it ready if federal funds come down the pike, and you'll know how to do it. So, I mean, I'm not here to get recommendations. I'm supposed to report on New Mexico. So Now, you know what happened to us last year. 2022 is a really bad year for us. Our governor came back and tried to do a little bit with the Prescribed Burn Act, and she's telling us we can't burn on red flag days. Well, okay, we're cool with that. That wasn't an issue, but it got kind of scary there because she could have just rescinded everything back. So right now we've got the right to burn in New Mexico, and so I'm planning on burning it myself personally. We have a lot of practitioners. We have a lot of agency folks. It's a combination that way. And I like that balance because they'll bring what happens on the ground. And these are the people that need to hear what happens on the ground so they can get involved with it. We're culturally covered here. BIA, we've got a lot of folks, tribal folks that hang out with us. New Mexico is kind of an odd state. And, you know, Colorado, as y'all southern neighbor, we would like to be going across these borders to take care of some of this stuff. Our main watersheds are up there in right at those borders, the San Juan Chama diversion and all that stuff up there. So we'll be trying to get to the table with you guys and, you know, go over some more plans that we have on the table that we'd like to see advanced. As a, you know, I still have a little bit of clout on the federal side. And I know my federal entities will go across that border because of suppression. They can go across those borders. So if they tell you differently, need to have them check the policies because they can. And that's another thing as a retiree from the federal government, I know what they can do and what they can't do. So if you can get you a retiree from a federal agency that did fire, I think that would help y'all progress. And as a person that worked with private landowners, I know how to network and work with landowners. So, I mean, we'll bring all of that to the table because our landowners are very much interested in the certification program. They understand what it means because we've got the word out to them. We're still working on getting more word out to them. You know, it's a never ending battle, but you got to let these folks know. I mean, myself personally, while I was still with the agency, while New Mexico was burning last year, I had landowners asking to be put on a list for prescribed fire. And you know, folks, you're like, are you kidding me? You know, but yeah, they understand the value. Never underestimate the people, the landowners. They know what this stuff means. If you can, you need to bring them to the table. They can go out there and spread the word more than we can. Any of us can. So if you get them involved with it, let them have some ownership, they're going to run with it. You know, I've got people from Washington, D.C., all the way back over here to New Mexico that run prescribed fire. And so I'm bringing all those people in. I mean, so you just need to keep on pushing with this stuff. I mean, fire is a cleanser and she can destroy. So it's how you present it to your people. All right. We want fuels reduction. We don't want prescribed fire. Some people, you can't say prescribed fire. You say fuels reduction, they understand that. So just how you present it to your folks. And I think that's all they allowed me to talk today. So I will shut up there. But I'm Gwen, New Mexico. Remember that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Gwen. What a great update. Exciting to, you know, I saw that legislation that came out about the red flag day, and, you know, I think many of us in the community had that same reaction of like, well, that could be a lot worse, you know?
Yeah, yes. Yes.
Given everything, we're very rarely burning on red flag days anyways. I mean, you know, it happens every once in a while for good reason, but if that's the extent of the fallout, well, you know, count your blessings sometimes. Yeah, politics is the art of the possible, right? So awesome. Well, thank you. Heather, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, thanks, Gwen. That was a great update. So my name's Heather Heward. I'm from I'm the founder and chair of the Idaho Prescribed Fire Council. We've been around for, I think this is our 4th year. Feels like we're just still getting our feet underneath us, but I think that probably people that have been around for longer feel the same as well. So I'm not sure if that feet underneath is the thing that happens in this business, but so the activities that we've been involved in that would be of specific interest to this group is that there was a lawyer commissioned this summer to consolidate the information about legislation and liability in all of the Western states. And I thought that was a really interesting move that, so Idaho Department of Lands apparently had some funding that they had allocated to this question. And I had lots of questions about prescribed fire liability. And so they went through, it's a 683 page document, plus it's like not quite done yet. And it has gone through and summarized a lot of information from each of these Western states, and including the federal side. So I have not received the final version of that. I'd sent to the current draft that I'd had to Daniel, and but that's going to be available for all of us to reference, and mostly just help us know where we're at. And we're going to be spending our year, kind of, that's going to be our focus, is we'll have our council meeting next March focused on that question of understanding our liability better, so that we can know where we can move, what pushes need to be made to make it work better for our group. The other thing that I'd like to throw out there is just as an idea, and wanting to make sure that we're on recognizing this as an opportunity, is that prescribed fire is prescribed fire. Fire is fire, and there's things that work in training, and there's things that don't work in training. And so my focus for my job, it's as a senior instructor at the University of Idaho, teaching fire and prescribed fire. And then I've just finished the training, the NWCG training for the Burn Boss level. It's now ARCS 300, and that's going to be publicly available in a month on the NWCG website. And that there's just resources that we can all share that are when we're instructing people in how to do this thing. And so just looking for opportunities to collaborate on the development and the sharing of these resources is something I would really love help from with the Coalition of Prescribed Fire Councils, so that there would be a central place to find resources about instruction. And I think that we could really be powerful that way. We also have the risk of being, if we're going to continue to train a lot of people in using prescribed fire, there's a lot of opportunity to grow people, and a lot of opportunity to not give them what they need to be able to do the job. And I want to make sure we avoid that. And so working together to make sure that people are getting the information that they need to do the job better is really important. And that the push to evolve that training from NWCG is they've gotten their product, and they will wash their hands of it for the next 5 years. But we know that this stuff needs to evolve regularly. And so let's be the pushers of that evolution, of that continued improvement in training. And that I've got a paper that I'll send out to everybody. It's hopefully getting reviewed and will be published in the Journal of Forestry about how that class was designed. So hopefully that's going to give some resources to people as well. That's part of my PhD here, trying to get done with.
Bravo.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather. That's exciting. Parker, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, question for the Washington folks. Thanks for presenting. Kate, you had mentioned that there was some marketing, or there was a time in the state where prescribed fire was just being talked about and became really well understood, and that sort of generated a lot of interest. That's awesome. I'm wondering if you know a little bit more about that and can talk about, like, what was the marketing, like how was prescribed fire being discussed in ways that really brought it to the forefront and helped put you where you are?
I think a lot of it has to do with, as Kara mentioned, we had a change in commissioner of public lands here in the state, and our new commissioner, our current commissioner of public lands, who's actually going to be on her way out to run for governor, she has a personal tie to council members, and she has a personal interest in prescribed fire, and she's been a huge proponent of not only the council, but prescribed fire in general. So it's under her purview that the state started burning again, that DNR started burning again. And so a lot of it has been, I'd say, connected to what she's put forward. And that's been directly fed, like a lot of the messaging to the commissioners been through the council. And Kara, I don't know if you want to add to that, but between that and Trex and just some public successes has, from what I've seen, been the major success. And just that, like, I've had folks when I'm in my red DNR state truck coming up and asking why we're not burning more. That is not what I expected moving here. Go ahead, Kara.
Yeah, and on the commissioner thing, I think the other thing that she's doing is she's big into branding and social media and those elements. And so you've seen DNR evolve over the last few years to have a pretty strong social media presence. And so I think there's a big piece of that as well. But there's been a lot of work. So the Forest Resiliency Burning Pilot Project, which was in 2016 and 2017, one of the things that it did was there's a couple different elements to it, but including the barriers, but one of the elements was the Forest Service was like, we actually need help engaging with communities, getting public support, or getting perceived support maybe. And so what we did was we really tried to use that funding to empower communities to develop communications. And so really did some work on some community-driven, local-led communications, but also some larger level messaging. So getting all the kind of partners on board. And then Trex has kind of, as Kate mentioned, Trex has continued to kind of like hold that torch of getting partners together and continuing like agreeing on messaging and getting the word out. So I think I don't think there's been like a huge, like, I know there's been some like branding and more like really marketing work down in like Florida, for example. I think it's more of a like disperse type of partnership and collaboration more thing than like a specific like branding and marketing thing. But I think I wish we had done some initial assessment before, and we could like assess now and kind of see how that's been effective and stuff. But I think we have seen a shift because of just sort of that partnership work. I hope that helps answer your question there, Parker.
Awesome. Great. Dennis, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, I'm Dennis Carlson. I'm coordinator for the Kansas Prescribed Fire Council, and also on here is Logan Shoup. He's the chair of the Kansas Prescribed Fire Council, and kind of from our perspective, I guess we could be either number 49 or number 2 out of 50 states in private land ownership. So we're primarily 98.1% private landowners. So kind of our push, certainly we got started back in 2008, which is part of smoke management plan. And a lot of that stemmed from quite a bit of burning in the Flint Hills region, which is an 18 county region, kind of in the central eastish part of Kansas. Typically they burn, it's private landowners on average burn about 2 to 2.5 million acres. And well, unfortunately, it ends up being about 3 days once you get the weather conditions right, and that's the smoke management plan. But our primarily push has been with private landowners. We do a lot of coordination with Wildlife and Parks, Forest Service, Kansas Forest Service, federal partners, USDA, NRCS, county conservation districts, local volunteer fire departments. And we've been doing quite a few live burn workshops now with landowners where we go in to an area, usually morning, do some instruction, and then go out in the afternoon and give them drip torches and how to do it right. And that's what I find most productive on that is you start to find the spark plugs for that community, mainly for prescribed burn associations, because that's what we really try to link them, kind of that training, but then get that kind of that trust built and excitement and start up more prescribed burn associations. And we've been doing that like the last 3 years through a CCGA grant. We're going to continue that going forward, mainly just spots across the state where we're trying to get some more prescribed burn associations started up, because we're behind the 8 ball. Just by the changing vegetation that we have here in Kansas. It's much easier for us to deal with grassland fires and forest fires just by the way we're equipped. And I would say, yeah, I think that's probably it. Logan, do you have anything else to fill in?
I didn't really have anything to add. I'm fairly new as the chair with the Prescribed Fire Council here in Kansas. So I'm still kind of getting my feet wet a little bit. But I do appreciate the invite and being able to hear everyone, because in a lot of respects, Kansas kind of lags behind a lot of other states. And so, seeing what you guys are dealing with, a lot of times, Kansas then ends up dealing with some of those same issues about 5 to 20 years later, it seems like. So it's definitely good to be able to listen in on this stuff.
Right, I know Missouri just passed last year, a state burner certification standard, and defined negligence. I think gross negligence, but I have to double check. So it's it's nice to have a little bit of an anchor point in these in Midwestern prescribed fire councils that are trying to nail some of this stuff down. I mean, it's Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, they burn a lot of acres, they put a lot up there. But there's I think a need and a desire to try and build out a little bit of a framework for it to support your community.
It's definitely
ABA growth has been great too. Y'all are on it. Go ahead, Logan.
I was just going to say, regulation wise and certifications wise and all that, it's a little bit more Wild West here.
Yeah.
So, but I imagine at some point some of that stuff's going to come down the pipeline.
Yeah, I think it was 7 to 10 years ago, there was the certified burner floated, and it was very quickly shot down by a lot of the private landowner groups, mainly because so many of them are already burning. I kind of joke about the Flint Hills, every baby is given a box of matches, but then you get to Western Kansas and fire is non-existent. So it's really interesting, I'll say that much. But working with them, getting those landowners in tune and seeing what they can do, and a lot of what it comes down to is figuring out what's going to benefit them most. Because of the certain vegetation changes, what they're starting to lose as far as especially grazing lands or those types of things, and then understanding that, then they're much more inclined to put prescribed fire back on the landscape.
Awesome. Well, before we get scattered out here again, if y'all could throw your emails and positions in your PFC in the chat here. I'm trying to get an updated list for our Western PFC contacts. The one that we've got in the coalition is a bit outdated. I'd like to move us at some point here towards something like constant contact for tracking that, but right now it's a scattering of malformed Excel spreadsheets, if you can imagine. So yeah, if you could throw that in there, that'd be helpful. Any other comments or questions or updates folks want to provide? I know we talked a little bit about Colorado's work. Parker, you want to throw anything in on that before we close this out?
Sure, maybe just briefly. The Colorado Prescribed Fire Council, it could use sort of a refresh, I suppose, in what it is trying to accomplish and do out here. The work the last few years, obviously COVID tripped up some things, but really amounts to an annual members meeting where we try to hit some relevant topics about state permitting and weather and maybe some discussion about prescribed fire programs across the state. But that is really just a once a year all members meeting. In between, there's not a whole lot of work that the voting members of the council are engaged with in. And so in thinking about a future where the council could be doing more, I think, yeah, we need to do some work there. Other state activities related to prescribed fire here in Colorado is that the state agency that oversees fire for Colorado, is put together a subcommittee to assess barriers and assess what sort of policy needs may be out there regarding advancing or improving conditions for prescribed fire, which has been great. Daniel and I both sit on that subcommittee. It is nearing the completion of its work here in the next couple months. We were advocating very strongly for a statewide strategic plan, barriers assessment and strategic plan for prescribed fire. The state, they listened about halfway on that, and they turned around and said, well, we'll do a statewide strategic plan for state agencies. So we wanted it to be all lands, all hands. However, it seems to be, it'll be a state focused piece. But in hearing from California and others, I think along the trajectory here, right, we're in this for the long haul, that the state agencies having their plans around prescribed fire could be a good thing. We just need to be there along with them and developing that. So I think that's about it. Anything else, Daniel?
No, I think that covers it. Like everything, it's fits and starts. We were starting to move things forward at the state level. And then the Marshall Fire happened, and that kind of scuttled some of our legislative efforts around prescribed fire, since it was in part started by a trash burn, and people, particularly the legislators and the grieving community, don't always differentiate between different types of private land burning very well. So, which is, I get that too. So it's tricky. And I think that was, if there's a key takeaway from this meeting today, I think that could be it. It's that it's tricky, and it's place-based, and it's community-based. But, I think it's valuable for us to share these successes. And I want to thank all of our presenters today for the work that they did, and for their time and insight that they brought to us all. And yeah, thank you everybody else for coming today. This was, I think, a great effort to get us all together and learn from each other. And I'd like to do more of these in the future. So if you have ideas for more kind of Western focused prescribed fire kind of meta conversations like this, hit me up and we can organize something else. I'm your Western chair representative on the PFC, or the coalition of PFCs here, and trying to make this useful and applicable for everybody here. So thank you.
This was great. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Gordon here.